I am so excited about what we're talking about today, but it starts with this. I read a story of a 16-year-old girl who wrote into a counselor. She said, I need some help with my mom. She said, my mom doesn't trust me. She will let me go out with my friends, but not until she knows every detail of what's happening. She said, I've never drank, I've never done drugs, I'm 16 years old, I have no intention of getting high or drunk as a high schooler. And my grades are great, she said. I have all A's and A minuses. And once in a while, my mom will say, good job. But then she'll almost always ask how my friends did. She said, when I get a bad grade, she's so disappointed and she will rant forever. I feel worthless, though I tried my hardest. Multiple times she's told me I need to work out more. Once it made me so insecure because she told me my thighs were getting too big. I'm 5'2", 110 pounds. I'm active, I work out, I play sports. She said, I have very low self-esteem. I struggle with anxiety. It's gotten to the point where she's the only person in my life who can make me cry so hard and make me feel as worthless as I feel. Do you know what it's like to be on the receiving end of that level of criticism? Some of you were raised in homes where criticism was a constant part of your life. Your mom was highly critical. Your dad was highly critical. Maybe it was a sibling, or maybe even sometimes I hear stories about grandparents. You said, be careful around grandma, careful around grandpa, because they were so critical. Some of you, it wasn't a family member, it was a classmate. The kids in school were so critical of you, or a coach or a teacher. Or for some of you, it was a marriage, a romantic relationship. Have you ever lived in an environment where you felt like you could never do anything right? What we know, there was an interesting article in Psychology Today in which they said, what happens when we're in these environments, we have to live in them for any amount of time, is that it can really damage us. Some of you are perfectionists. Everything has to be perfect. Nothing is ever perfect enough. And one of the natural consequences of being in highly critical environments is perfectionism, and this may be a factor for you. Others of you, it's anxiety. Well, how can it not be? If you work or live in an environment where there's high criticism, anxiety is going to be the natural consequence because you're always waiting for the next criticism to come. You never know what's going to trigger it. Or others, it's conditional love. That's kind of the message that was sent. If you are perfect, then I will love you. Ever gotten that message in life? And then obviously, like the girl said, self-esteem gets damaged. And if I were to ask you this question, how would you answer? Is the world getting more critical or less critical? Right? It's laughable. The anonymity of the internet has changed everything, unfortunately, for this poor generation coming up right now. Post a picture of anything and you will get criticized, right? Put out there something you're proud of and you'll get criticized. We live in a critical society, and it's getting worse. And it's everywhere. It's not just in your families. It's in your work environments. Many of you work in highly critical environments. Some of you, it's school. Every day you get criticized. Some of you, like I said, it's unfortunately one of the most critical places in America is the church. Do something wrong and go to church. Unfortunately, it's even there. I've told this statistic before. 90% of all pastors won't retire as a pastor. 90%. When I was a pastor for 26 years, I had a folder that was that thick, full of critical letters. I can't tell you how much pain there was from critical letters, and then critical emails, and then critical phone calls, and then people who would come up and say it right to your face. I mean, the toll it takes, and some of you know this. You know what it's like to be in a critical job, a heavily criticized environment. It takes the life out of you. This is not what it's supposed to be like. This is not the world that we're supposed to live in. So we're in this series called Listen to This, and I said when I started the series, it's going to be about words and the power of our words, and what I want to show you today is this. I want to talk to you about how to move from criticism to encouragement, and if you don't have the notes for today, I'm asking you to get them. So we should have them in the back. If you didn't grab the notes, they should be in your program. Open up your program, grab your notes, grab a pen, something to write with. Welcome to those of you watching on YouTube. In the link right below the video are these notes. Please open the notes. You're going to want to follow along with this today because there are some things that we're going to talk about that are going to be so important. So let's get started right away. First off, understand the limits of criticism. Before we go anywhere, we live in such a critical environment, you have to rethink criticism. Because many of us have bought into what our culture says is important about criticism, and our culture is wrong. Our culture is wrong when it comes to this topic of criticism. So you have to understand the limitations of criticism. Now, if you ask me, many of you know that I love reading. I read all the time. I got lots of books I love. And if you were to ask me top 3 favorite books, certainly in my top 3 would be this book. You ever read this book? How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's been around probably about almost 100 years now, a long time. Dale Carnegie wrote this book back in probably the 1930s, I think. The Carnegie Institute still exists today. They still go into corporations. They train on this stuff. It is fantastic. I have given away so many copies of this book because you can find this at garage sales all the time for 50 cents or a quarter. I buy them whenever I see them and I just give them away like candy. I think all of my kids have gotten this book at some point. It's on my Kindle, it's on my phone, and then I reread it over and over again. So recently, a couple months ago, I was rereading it, and I got through the first chapter, and I'm like, what book am I reading? I backed out of it. It's been a few years since I read it, and I'm like, yeah, I'm reading the right book, because the opening chapter said something, and I just never caught how direct he said it until I read it this last time a couple of months ago. The opening chapter says that we need to stop criticizing people. It just needs to go away from our vocabulary. Here's what he says. He said, I personally, the author, I had to blunder through this old world for a third of a century before it began to dawn on me that 99 times out of 100, people don't even criticize themselves for anything, no matter how wrong it may be. Isn't that true? You ever seen an interview with a prisoner who just killed somebody and they always got an excuse for why they did it, why they had to do it? It wasn't their fault. Nobody criticizes themselves for anything. So people don't criticize themselves, no matter how wrong it may be. And then he said, criticism then is futile because it puts a person on the defensive, usually makes them strive to justify themselves. It's dangerous because it wounds their pride, hurts their sense of importance. It arouses resentment. So, all of these toxic things, these bad things that happen in our relationships, when we start criticizing people, he says, that's why it's just got to go away. As a matter of fact, this is so funny. So I prepped this message. And I was talking to a friend of mine, one of my best friends. The company that he works for just hired Dale Carnegie's company to come in and do training for their entire staff. So I was talking to my friend on the phone. He's like, oh my goodness, this guy came in from Dale Carnegie. He was teaching us how to win friends and influence people. I'm like, oh, what did you learn? And he said, well, the number one principle in this is this. Don't criticize, condemn, or complain about the people around you. Can you imagine if your work environment simply lived to that alone? It's just laughable, isn't it? Never criticize, never condemn, or never complain about the people you're working with. Never. Imagine what churches would be like if we just did that alone. Oh, by the way, we're not supposed to. So then my friend was like, well, my friend struggles with this a little bit. So my friend said he sat through the whole day's training, went up to the trainer afterwards. He said, I got an employee, someone who works for me, who acts like they're the boss. They tell me what to do. And they say it to me in a rude way, and they're disrespectful. And so my friend has tried the criticism route for a long, long time. It's not working. So he said to the trainer, what should I say to them to get them to change? And the trainer said, well, he said, is there anything this employee does that's good for you? And my friend said, oh, yeah. They are so good at details. In fact, I'm in big trouble without this person in my life. I like to surround myself with people like this because I'm so bad at it, and they did this so well. And he said, well, has their detail ability helped you recently? And he said, well, just this last week, saved me from missing a phone call I would have had to make. And oh my goodness, I really needed this. And so the trainer said, well, tell her that. Why don't you go tell her that? So my friend, a little skeptical, said, all right. So he left the training, called his employee on the phone and said, I want you to know how much I appreciate and admire your ability to catch all the details that go on around here. And he spent time on the phone just praising this person for what they did that was good. He said her behavior over the next 2 days changed. And then she started to revert back. And my friend wanted to go right back to criticism. It's like, wait a second, didn't you just hear? You changed their behavior with positivity, encouragement, and you want to go right back to criticism? Never criticize, never condemn, never complain. It's just inconceivable what it would be like to be in an environment like that. Now, some of you are like, well, doesn't the Bible talk about criticism? Well, sure does. Proverbs 15:31 says, if you listen to constructive criticism, you'll be at home among the wise. And so the Bible would say that, yep, there's a place for this. Matter of fact, as I was prepping this and learning all this, I thought, I'm going to have to add a message into this series on how to do constructive criticism. Because the Bible actually does say it, and but for the sake of today, I had to address this, but the reality is this is what you need to know. The people around you will change in positive ways when they get these three things. If you're a parent, you want to change your kids' lives, you give them these things. If you're a spouse, you want to change your spouse's life, this is what they need. You want to change your coworkers' lives, you want to change anyone's life, this is what they need. And this is, by the way, the proportion in which they need it. They need grace, truth, and time. And Jesus is the model of this. Read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and look at what Jesus did with these guys who were just complete screw-ups. Jesus literally had to deal with his 12 disciples at one point, arguing about who's going to be the best and the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. No, I'm better than you. I'm going to be better than all 11 of you guys. No, I'm going to be better than you. The most humble, God himself humbles himself to become a servant and listens to his 12 disciples argue about who's going to be the greatest. I mean, this is what he had to deal with. All of them abandon him on the night of his betrayal. They all run. I mean, constant screw-ups. And they received incredible grace. They got some truth. And he gave them time. This is the formula Jesus used. This is the formula that changes people. And you want to know why the church in America is dying and why we see so little transformation is because this is the formula that you find in churches. Grace. Truth. Like a club. Here's everything you're doing wrong. Here's every way in which you're screwing up your life. And oh, by the way, I told you this once already. Why haven't you changed? I'm done with you. But this is the formula that changes people. Grace, truth, time. And so the truth piece is that constructive criticism, it needs to be minimal as a part of our relationships. And here, since I'm going to talk about it in the future, I did want to just give you a little bit. It needs to be rare. If you're going to give constructive criticism, it needs to rarely happen in your relationships. Here's why. Do you know in the New Testament, one of the coolest things about this, if you become a follower of Jesus, one of the neatest things he does at the moment you begin to follow him is that he puts his spirit inside of you. God's spirit comes to live inside of you. And then God says, oh, and by the way, when he comes, he doesn't come empty-handed. He brings gifts. He brings his gifts and puts them inside of you. They're called spiritual gifts. The New Testament talks about these things. All these different spiritual gifts that God brings when you become a follower of Jesus. One of the spiritual gifts is this. If your gift is to encourage others, be encouraging. One of the spiritual gifts that God gives some people when they become followers of his is the gift of spiritual encouragement. It's just one of the many gifts listed in the New Testament. So in other words, what happens is for some people when they become followers of Jesus, they are supernaturally empowered by God to become better at encouraging. And you'll know when it's your gift because you'll love it when you do it. It energizes you and it brings transformation to the people around you. That's what his gifts are intended to do. Change you and change them. By the way, this is why some of you do not experience joy in following Jesus. It's because God put these gifts inside of you. You don't know what they are and you're not using them. He brought you a gift and you haven't opened the box. If God gives you a gift, that's cool. You should use that. So you got to discover what that is and you got to use it. And one of the gifts, so again, he supernaturally gifts some of his followers to be great encouragers. Do you know there is no spiritual gift of criticism? God never supernaturally empowers anybody to be more critical. Doesn't happen. but he supernaturally empowers people to be more encouraging. Now, what do you think that tells us about what God wants in our life? It needs to be rare. Criticism needs to be so rare. It needs to be planned. Some of you, if I were to ask you, are you a critical person? Some of you know this about yourself. You are self-aware to know that I'm too critical. I know it. Okay, then you need to stop. Your criticism needs to be really well thought through and planned. That's why we're going to do a message on it. How to rarely, once in a while, do it, because it's grace, truth, time that changes people. Stop thinking so highly of yourself that your criticism is really what's going to change people's lives. It's going to hurt them. You need to avoid a critical attitude. Some of you have a critical attitude towards one of your kids right now. You only see all they're doing wrong, and that's what they hear from you. Some of you have this towards your spouse. You only see everything they're doing wrong, and that's what they hear from you. Or a coworker, a friend. You will destroy them if you do this. And then you have to really understand its limitations. There's a reason the New Testament has so many verses like this. At the end of the book of 2 Corinthians, Paul wrote to this church and he said, hey, brothers and sisters, I close my letter with these last words to all of you guys. And he said, be joyful, grow to maturity, and encourage each other. If you have your pen and you're looking at that verse on your notes, would you underline those last three words? Encourage each other. That is a command. Now, two things about that. First off, when you think about the people you go to church with, whatever your church home is, when was the last time you said anything encouraging to any of them? Because it's commanded. We're supposed to this is just supposed to be the environment in which we live. We encourage each other. And then the second thing is, the command in the Bible is to encourage each other. I cannot put a command up on the Bible, or up on the screen from the Bible where God says, criticize each other. There is no command in the Bible to criticize each other. And yet, if I were to ask you, what have you received more of in your church background? Criticism from Christians or encouragement from Christians? How could we get this so wrong? It doesn't even exist in the Bible, but that does. The command to encourage. And the reason is this, and this will make sense, okay? If you want to bring positive change in someone's life, you can't use a negative tactic, right? Does that even make sense? I'm going to use something negative to make you positive. What? That's not going to work. If you want to bring positive change in someone's life, what do you bring? You give them something positive. Your positive behavior will bring positive results. Criticism is a negative behavior. And so many people think, I'm going to criticize somebody into a positive change. No, you won't. No, you won't. And God wants to use us to change people's lives in positive ways, and that's going to come through positive behavior, which means, number two, you have to embrace the power of encouragement. Criticism isn't where the power is. There's no power there. No power to make positive change in people's lives. You have to embrace the power of encouragement. This is where the power exists. Let me show you just how powerful this really is. Years and years ago, there was a sociology professor at a major university who wanted to do after teaching on sociology is really about the study of human interactions and what creates, favorable environments for people to change. And he sent his class into the slums of Baltimore years ago. And he had them study 200 boys in that environment. And then he had them make a prediction about what, based on what we know about sociology, your life is so impacted by the environment in which you're raised, right? The environment in which they're raised, pretty terrifying. Gun violence, sexual abuse, physical violence, broken homes, poverty, drugs, alcohol, all the things that they were dealing with. And so the sociology class spent all this time studying these 200 boys, and the outcome they all came to, the decision they came to is these boys are doomed. All 200 of them. There are no positive environmental factors. These kids, here's what we predict their future will be like based on what we know about sociology. 25 years later, that professor was retired. The new professor who had taken over was cleaning out some files. He found the report from 25 years earlier. He's like, I wonder how good those students did at predicting these kids' future. So he assigned his class to go track down these 200 kids and find out what happened. Well, they could only find 180 of them. 20 had moved, some were dead, they couldn't find the rest of them. And so they tracked down these 180. Of the 180, 176 of the 180 had achieved remarkable results in life. Doctors, lawyers, specialists from the slums of Baltimore. So, of course, the sociology professor was stunned. How does that happen? And so he started talking to these 176 men, and they all had the exact same answer. With emotion, they said, well, there was this teacher. By the way, you know that we know this. You know the number one thing that helps transform a teenager's life? One positive person. One. Did you know that? We know that. It's one. It doesn't take a village. It takes one to change a person's life forever. And that's what they all had. So he tracked down the teacher. She was retired by then, of course. But sharp as a tack. And so he's like, what did you do? How did you change the course of these kids' lives and the environment that they're in? They all should have been gangbangers. They should have been in prison by now. They should be, drug dealers. And they're doctors and lawyers and transformed. And she said, her simple answer first was, well, I just loved them. And then as he began to interview her, here's what his conclusion was. He said, you know what, if we as parents or friends want to motivate our family members or people around us, we must be encouragers. We must choose to give a sincere appreciation and honest praise for even the slightest good that people do. That's how we spur people on to greater achievements in life based on what he saw in that person. So you want to change somebody? The force that you're going to have to use to transform somebody's life is encouragement. That's what's going to change their life. You want to read about it? Go here. This is another one of my favorite books by Ken Blanchard. Now, some of you are like, I don't like to read. This is simple. This is a short little book. It's like really, really thin, not a lot of words. And it's basically a story of how, you ever been to SeaWorld? You ever seen these things? So, Whale Done. It's the story of how they train these killer whales. They're 12,000 pounds. How do they get them to do this? They clap and they jump over a big, they do these tricks. Well, how do they do it? I promise you, they don't criticize them. They don't spank them. These things will kill you. Killer whales, 12,000 pounds. How do they get them to do it? Well, here's what they do, and the story's so fascinating. What they do is, when they're training a new killer whale, for instance, they'll put them in a tank and they'll put a rope across the whole tank, just lying on the surface of the water, and the whale will be just swimming around one day, and all of a sudden one day it will just accidentally swim over the rope. And the moment it does, the trainers clap and throw fish in and feed them, give them a reward. And they're like, fish, this is delicious. Wonder why I got this. I don't know. So they're swimming around, and the next day, they swim over the rope again, and they feed them again. Every time they go over that rope, they reward them, and all of a sudden the killer whale goes, oh my goodness, I go over this rope. I hear this clap, and I go over this rope. I get fish. Best deal ever. So the whales start going over the rope. They hear the clap, they go over the rope, they get the fish. And then all of a sudden, they just raise that rope up, because these guys can jump. That's not hard. So they go under the rope, they get no fish, but they hear the clap, they go over the rope, they jump over the rope, they get the fish. So then eventually they don't need the rope anymore. They hear the clap, they jump. And they can train them this way. It is entirely 100% through positive reinforcement. And then the principles they teach about how this works in human interactions. You change people's lives, transform their behavior through positive reinforcement. That's how you do it. You praise people even if they are remotely close to performing the action correctly. So your kindergartner decides to do something nice for mommy one day, and she tries to fold the towels for mom, and it's a big ball. What would most mommies say? No, Junior, that's not how we do it. We do this and this and that. Wrong. They just went over the rope. You praise them and give them treats. That's what you do. It's remotely close. They mow the yard. They miss giant swaths of it. And you walk out and you say, we're going to Dairy Queen right now. I love you. Get in the car. And you praise them and you reward even remotely close. Close, baby. You know why? Because what gets praised gets repeated. You think that kid is motivated to mow next time? Woohoo! I got Dairy Queen. I'm going again. Give me that mower. The grass isn't even grown yet. I'm mowing. I want Dairy Queen again. What gets praised gets repeated. And positive comments and encouragement and praise, that's what changes people. You think your criticism is changing him? It's like, well, I criticize my spouse all the time. Yeah, how's that working? Really becoming the man or woman you want them to be, aren't they? Doesn't work. Damages them, undoes the positive. It's because positive change, positive words create positive change, not negative words. And you want to know why? This was so interesting as I was prepping this message. I have never noticed this in the Bible before. Let me show you some verses. Look at this. May God, who gives this patience and encouragement, help you live in complete harmony with each other as is fitting for the followers of Christ Jesus. So in the opening thing, it says, may God. One of the things that God gives in this world is what? Encouragement. Look at this verse. Such things were written in the scriptures, your Bible, long ago to teach us. And the scriptures, what do? They give us hope and encouragement. So why did God give us the Bible? Part of why he gave us the Bible was so that we could be encouraged. But God, who encourages those who are discouraged, encouraged us by the arrival of Titus. His best friend came at that moment when he desperately needed him. God's like, Paul's going to need Titus. And so he prompted Titus to come at that moment so he could encourage him. So you hear the pattern? This is what you need to know. God is an encourager. He gave the Bible to encourage us. He sends people to encourage us. He gives gifts of encouragement, the spiritual gift we talked about of encouragement, so that we can be encouraged. Now, I bet if I were to ask you at the start of the service today, I want you to turn your notes over on the back. I want you to write down the top 3 things you think about when you think about God. I bet most of you in your top 3 would have put God as loving. We can all get that one. How many of you in your top 3 would have said, our God is an encouraging God? Some of you don't view God this way. Some of you view God on the other side, that he's a critical being. Some of you, when you think of God, you think of him as a list maker and a list taker. He's like writing down everything you've done that's wrong because he can't wait to let you have it for all those things you've done wrong. You have to ignore so many verses in the Bible that say, our God in his heart is an encourager. He's like watching for us to do anything remotely close. Oh my goodness, they at least said prayer like this. Oh yeah, I'm going to move. He's an encourager. He gave us the Bible to encourage us. He sends people to encourage us. He gives people supernatural abilities to encourage. Why? Because he wants us to be encouraged. Because it's his nature. Our God is an encouraging God. Is this how you look at God? You want to know why positive words result in positive change in people's life? Because it's when we're most like God. Because our God is an encourager. One of the things I was reading this week said, an earlier study shows that no one can achieve significant heights in life alone. You know that, right? You will never become what you are capable of becoming alone, ever. You need people. It is always done with the help and assistance of others. And in this, encouragement is without any doubt one of the most powerful things we can do to help others. Did you know that? And then tells us, the article went on to tell the story of this man, Charles Dickens. It's been a little while since I was in school, but I know that even today, people are still reading the books of Charles Dickens hundreds of years after he wrote them. A Tale of Two Cities, Great Expectations. I had to read David Copperfield. I had to read Oliver Twist. You ever watch The Christmas Carol, The Three Ghosts at Christmas Time? He wrote that all those years ago. His books still impact literature today, hundreds of years after he died. This man was one of the greatest writers in the history of the world. You know how his story began? When Charles Dickens was 12, his dad went to prison. Charles Dickens had to go work in a rat-infested factory putting labels on bottles at the age of 12. All he wanted to do was write. So in his spare time, he would write books and send them off to publishers. He got rejection notice after rejection notice after rejection notice, until one day, he got another rejection notice, but the publisher returned a note to him saying, you are a great writer, and the world needs you. Do you have any idea what the impact of those words were on Charles Dickens? The reason you know his name and why we still read his books is because of that unknown publisher who rejected him but wrote those words of encouragement. Charles Dickens literally ran through the streets of London rejoicing when that publisher said those words to him. We know the name Charles Dickens because those few words of encouragement at that moment saved him. Here's what I want you to understand. Some of you, right now, you are nearby and close to people, in relationship with people, and your one sentence of encouragement is all they're going to need to become what God has made them to be. They are one sentence of encouragement away, and you have it. It didn't take a lot of words. It took that little bit of encouragement, and he was transformed. That's the power of encouragement. So what all of this means, of course, is that we need to learn how to develop this habit in our lives. This needs to become who we are. We need to be encouragers. This just needs to become a part of our daily existence, that we just are so encouraging. Because this is where the real power is. You want me to see, want me to show you where God sets the bar? Look at this. Look at these next three words. Everything you say. Let everything you say be good and helpful so that your words will, what? They'll be an encouragement. So here's the question. Is everything you say encouraging? Can you imagine what would happen if Christians who followed Jesus seriously simply took this verse to heart? And we began to make it our goal that everything we said was about being good and helpful so we could encourage the people around us. Do you know what would happen? I'll tell you right now, we could not build buildings big enough to handle the number of people that would want to come and be with us if we simply did what the New Testament says. We could not build buildings big enough because people are desperate for encouragement. And this is who we're supposed to be. Let everything you say. So how do we say these things? A couple of things. First, on your notes, you need to be sincere. You know, if they can't sing a lick, you don't need to say, oh, you could be a professional singer. They're tone deaf. They can't be a professional singer. You don't need to lie to them. I'm going to lie to encourage them. No, that won't help. It's got to be sincere. But what we often do is we take our encouragement, we add little cautions to it. And some of you will recognize this story. There was a woman who dreamed of becoming a professional musician. When she was younger, she would risk this dream with her friends. And she got advice that many of you have gotten. Her friends would say to her, oh, it's a great idea, but you got to be careful. And they would give her all kinds of what she said, practical advice. This is what we do as parents, right? You know, if one of your kids said, I'm going to be a professional musician, I'm going to be a professional actor, we'd go, well, that's a good dream, but you know they don't make much money, and it's real hard to get into that. And we give them all the practical advice, right? Because we're just caring about them. Yeah. She said all that made her do was want to give up in the face of that. But one time she developed a friendship with a man who was a brilliant jazz musician. And one day she risked her dream with him. Without blinking, he said, oh, you'd be fabulous. That's perfect for you. She said, at that moment, I felt like flying. I'd never experienced such direct and truthful support without a single practical warning attached to it. That friend set me free by offering one simple thing, encouragement. I love the sentence, I felt like flying. Do you get why you're here? You are here to help people fly. That's what you're here. People are chained down by all the criticism they've received to this point in their life. This is a critical world, and they are chained to the ground, and God put you and me here to help them fly. Cut those chains with encouragement and let them fly. It's got to be sincere. It's got to be, second, specific. It's got to be really specific. Encouragement to have really impact has to be something that is specific to their life. So some of you may be sitting here going, and you feel a little convicted. You're like, oh, I can't even think about the last encouraging thing I said to my parents or to my friends or to my spouse. It's like, oh, I can't even think of the last encouraging thing I said to my spouse. Oh boy. So I gotta do something. I gotta go home. So on your way home today, you're like, I'm gonna take a risk. I'm gonna say something encouraging to him right now because Brian said to. So it's like, all right, honey, you're real good at everything, and I like your hair. All right, so it's like, okay, All right. Good effort, remember? They went over the rope, so reward that. But to really get good at encouragement, it has to be specific. What do you like about them? I love your big, big heart. You have such a beautiful smile. I admire the way you love on your kids. You have such a positive impact on people. Your encouragement has made me a better person. What can you specifically tell them? Because remember, what gets praised gets repeated. Be specific. Third, notice when they've done something right. This is one of the saddest parts of researching this message. Do you know what the number one thing people receive is when they do something right in the home or at the office? Number one thing they get? Nothing. They get nothing. A kid decides to do something nice for mom and dad, and they clean the house. And mom and dad say nothing. A spouse decides to take a risk, is like, I'm going to buy them flowers. And they get nothing. An employee goes above and beyond, does something good for the company, and they get nothing. Totally demoralizing. People need encouragement. And then tell them positive things about themselves. This is, if you get nothing out of this, get this one. Tell them positive things about it. For some of you, the little list below this is what you need to keep in some place. So you're like, I got to be encouraging. Here's how to do it. So it says, on your notes, talk about their strengths and gifts and talents. Most people are very, very aware of all the things they can't do well, but they're not aware of what they do well. That's your job. Tell them, what do you see in their life that you think, oh my goodness, you have such a good talent with this. You're so gifted at this. Tell them. Tell them something you admire about them. Tell them good things that others are saying about them. You hear somebody say something good about them? Tell them. I did this with a coworker recently. My coworker works in a very stressful job, highly demanding job, and one day I overheard some of my other friends at the office talking about this person, and the rumor was that this person was leaving and they were scared because they would miss all the expertise this person brought to this role. Now, the rumor was untrue, but I immediately contacted my friend, and I said, hey, just want you to know, I overheard some people talking about you, and they were scared that you would leave because you are so valuable to this company. I just wanted you to know that's how people think about you. Tell them. That meant so much to my friend, because you know what she hears the most of? Criticism. Tell them. You want to know what this is all about? Save the best verse for last. This is what it's about. Encourage each other, and look at these next words. Matter of fact, do you have a pen? You underline these next 4 words. Build each other up. You know what encouragement is about? It's about those 4 things. Building each other up. Do you know what criticism is about? Tearing each other down. Critics want you down at their level, right? They pull you down on purpose, and the world is filled with them. Encouragement is about building each other up. God put us here to be builders, not destroyers. Now, this subject means so much to me because I had to be rebuilt. I had to be rebuilt. If you were taking a picture of what my life looked like about 2 years ago, this would be it. This was my life about 2 years ago. Actually, this isn't accurate enough because all the walls should be down. That's not enough. 2 years ago, my marriage ended in some horrific circumstances that are not at all what people say about me. And I was suicidal, depressed, alone, no career, no future. Yeah, too many walls there. I mean, devastated. And the critics were all over, tearing down. On top of it, it's like, I'm already down. I can't go any lower than that. And here I am, almost 2 years later. Do you know what the number one thing people who love me and are close to me say about me now? I hear this so many times. My daughter on the phone said it to me this week. She's like, Dad, you're just so happy now. I went to visit someone in the hospital this week, and I saw a friend I haven't seen in months. She's like, what's happened to you? You're so happy now. I was at an event last night, and a friend I haven't seen in 2 years pulled me aside and said, it's so good to see you so happy now. I was like, okay, I feel it. I've been rebuilt. You know what the number one thing God used to rebuild me? It was encouragement from people who loved me, who would not let me go. First 10 days, when everything fell apart 2 years ago, were the worst of my life. In those 10 days, there were some amazing examples of encouragement. One of them that totally changed my life was one day, two of my friends called and they said, "Can we come over and just talk to you?" And I said, "Sure." You never knew what was going to happen then. Never knew. They came in, they sat on the couch, and they started by saying to me, "We want you to know, even if every single rumor about you is true, we love you. And we're not going anywhere. And we'll be here for you no matter what you need." I mean, even today, I can't even talk about it without the emotion of that it generated even then, almost 2 years ago. Remember what I said are the 3 things people need to change and grow? Number 1, that environment of grace, unconditional love and acceptance. That's what they gave me that day. It's like, hey, I don't care. Don't care. Rob banks, we're going to be here for you. Murder people, maybe not. But okay, Rob, we are going to love you no matter what. And that encouragement that day, and all the encouragement that came from so many other people, changed my life. It rebuilt the rubble. We are builders. We're builders. You are with people every day whose lives look like that. Every day. You may not see it, but there are people who are desperate for one word of encouragement. Somebody say something nice to me, because they live in an environment of criticism. They're desperate for this. So obviously there's some pretty practical applications. For those of you who are parents, are you more encouraging? Matter of fact, this is the wrong way to word this. Let me start with those of you who are married. Those of you who are married. Does your spouse receive more encouragement from you or more criticism? And that's even the wrong question. Here's the right question. Does your spouse receive 50 encouraging things for every 1 criticism? That's probably the right proportion. It's not 10 to 1. It's probably 50 to 1. Does your spouse receive that ratio of encouragement from you? Some of you are like, are you kidding me? Not even close. It's maybe the other way. It's like, what would we even talk about if I wasn't criticizing them? Okay, well then stop talking, because you're not ready to talk. You got to answer those questions. What do you admire about them? When you fell in love with them, what did you fall in love with them for? What were the strengths and talents they have? I promise you, they have something. You may be focused on all the wrong things. Get focused on the right things. Your encouragement will change them, not your criticism. Same thing with you as parents. If you're a parent, and I don't care how old your kids are, they still need your encouragement. How much encouragement do they receive from you? How much encouragement? Is it 50 to 1? Is that the right ratio? Do your kids get 50 positive comments from you for every single thing you criticize them for? You close to that? That's the goal. Your criticism tears them down. Your encouragement builds them up. And I know what's going to happen. We live in a critical environment. You walk out here and go, oh boy, I really need to do something different. So then set your phone. This is what I do. Set alarms on your phone to go off during the week and have it say, encourage someone. Otherwise, we live in a critical environment. You think you're going to remember this message? No way. You're going to get criticized and you're going to forget. You have to find a way to make this a part of your day-to-day life. Put it on your phone. Put it on your bathroom mirror. Hang these notes up on your fridge. Do whatever it takes. And for those of you who are married and with kids, your assignment is clear. This week, you need to encourage them. You need to be sincere and tell them what you love about them. That's your job. You have to give it to them this week. They need to know. Some of you, you're going to make people around you fly because of this. Let me have you bow your heads as we finish today. If you're just exploring your faith with us here on watching online, thanks for tuning in. This is such an important message to hear. Our God is not a critical God sitting there with a list, waiting for you to screw up so he can add another thing to the list of the things he doesn't like about you. He doesn't want to tear you down. He wants to build you up. And the proof of that is what he has done in sending his own son. Leaving heaven, Jesus came to earth 2,000 years ago to die on a cross for all of us so that we could be completely forgiven. Now, if this is where you're at, if you will take this step today, and turn to Jesus and ask for his gift of forgiveness, then he will forgive you and come and make his home inside of you. Like I said earlier in the message, he will put his Spirit inside of you and give you gifts. He will bring you gifts as if he doesn't give us enough. And if you want this relationship with him, with your head bowed, you can say something like this to him. Say, Jesus, I'm turning to you today. I need you. Would you please forgive me for what I've done? Please forgive me. Come and make your home inside of me. I want a new relationship with you. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, as we finish up, can you grab your program? And inside is this little response card. Can you just take this out and just go ahead and put it down, even for a regular tender, just fill it out. Maybe today, though, you decided to put your faith in Jesus. You can check that box, let us know what you've done, or renewed a commitment. If you have something you want us to pray about, just put it on the box there at the bottom. We'll pray for you. Some of you are like, this is my deal. I'm not good at this. Please pray. We'll pray for you. And then just drop it in the offering box back by the doors where you came in. Also, just an update on my schedule. Because of the snowstorm last week, we pushed this message to this week. So I will be here the next 2 Sundays as well. So it'll be 3 straight Sundays in a row. Pretty sure that we're going back to one service next week, so don't come at 9. We'll be here at 10:30 for one service, and we'll coordinate all this. You can follow along with Always Know What's Happening by looking in your program and looking on the Penuel Facebook page. So thanks for coming. You got your work cut out for you. Go encourage someone today.